So before we start learning tonight, I want to dedicate this shiur to the bocher Moshe Miletsky, who's becoming bar mitzvah this week, and his father, Yedid Nafshi, Harav Reb Sariel Miletsky, is the Rav of the shul in Edison, stepped in. My dear friend, Harav Agon, Harav Luban, Reb Yankov Luban, retired, and Harav Agon Reb Sariel Miletsky took his place. He's a Talmud of Reb Yankov Luban, and my bracha to him is Lahagdil Torah Ladira, and Moshe should grow to be a great Talmud Chacham and a Marabitz Torah B'Yisrael, and he should have so much nachas. So this week's Parshas Balak, and Bilam HaRasha quotes a posik that Revavoy Salfi Yisrael, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, who knows, millions of Eden, start Avodas Hayoim with the posik Matoivi Oholecho Yankov Mishkanoi Secho Yisrael, and Chazal HaMedrash give a pshat. Meberchoisav shel Oisei HaRasha atolomeid mahaya belibo. Bilam wanted a curse shelo lohem bot Hakeneses bot HaMedrash, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu mahafach klora labroch, and he says the glory and magnificence of bot Hakeneses and bot HaMedrash matoivu oyolecho Yankov Mishkenoi Secho Yisrael. So the topic we will be discussing today is bot Hakeneses and bot HaMedrash, Kedushas Beis HaMedrash and Kedushas Beis Hakeneses. So many times, I think just a year ago, the topic we discussed in Parshas Balak was the similarity, the symbolism, and in how many different ways each shul resembles the Beis HaMikdash. We won't go over that again, but we will discuss Kedushas Beis Hakeneses, vice versa, Kedushas Beis HaMedrash. So on Megillah Chav mit Beis, there's a machlokes between Rav Papi and Rav Papa, and both quote Rava, the great Ameroa Rava. Which of the two is holier? Which has a higher level of Kedusha, Beis Hakeneses or Beis HaMedrash? Let me just briefly explain. Both the Hakeneses are places that are designated for tefillah, for davening alone. Both the Hamedrashes are places that are designated and miyuched for Torah. Today, in our communities, almost every Beis Hakeneses is also a Beis HaMedrash, and every Beis HaMedrash is a Beis Hakeneses because there are so many Lamdei Torah. But in days of yore, and even today, in many shuls, especially Ashkenazi shuls, there are Botei Knesiyos, which you only daven, and next to the Beis Hakeneses there's a Beis HaMedrash, where you have shiurim and people learn. So the machlokes says which has a higher level of Kedusha. And the Gemara says this machlokes is dependent on another machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi, interpreting a posuk in Malachim Beis. I think it's Perek Chof in Malachim Beis, or Perek Chof Hey. V'soraf es Beis Hashem, v'es Botei Yerushalayim, v'es habayis hagadol. What does bayis hagadol mean? One says bayis shemagadol beit Torah, and that's a Beis HaMedrash. The other says bayis shemagadol beit Tefillah, and that would be the Beis Hakeneses. Shulchan Aruch twice. Kuf Nun Gimel Sif Aleph Reish Nun Tes Sif Beis in Yerodea. The psak is a Beis HaMedrash has more kedusha than a Beis Hakeneses. And I think in Pnimius ba'oimek hadevorim al shloisha devorim oilam oimed al Torah al avodah val gemilas chosodim. And the Zohar Kodesh in many different sources says the central pillar of the world is Torah. Avoid and Chesed, miyamin u'mismol, from right and left. So according to the Zohar, Avoida and Gemilas Chosodo are like supporting pillars, but the central pillar is Torah. And I explained, in the Heichel, there are three kelim, Menorah, Mizbeach, Shulchan, indicative of Torah, Avoida, Gemilas Chosodim. So on the practical Avoida, you need all three, and each is as important as the others. That's in practicality. But in Kodesh HaKodeshim Lefnai V'Lefnim, Be'itkasya V'lo Be'itgalia, Torah reigns supreme. And in Kodesh HaKodeshim, all we have is a Reinu Vedas, Bo Luchas Abris, Sefer Torah. And where is that? On Even HaShasiel, both in Bavli and in Yerushalmi. Chazal define Even HaShasiel, Memeno Hushtat HaOlam. That is the bedrock. That is the fundament of the world. And that is where the Oren stands. So in Pnimius, Torah comes before anything else. And that is why Chazal say, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. And that is why a Beis Medrash has even a higher level of Kedusha than a Beis Knesses. And the Nafkamin ala halacha is Malam b'kodesh velo moridim. You could transform and turn a Beis Knesses into a Beis Medrash, but not the other way around. How do we define a Beis Medrash? Kuf Nun Aleph Siv Beis Shulchan Aruch says, the Kedusha of the Beis Medrash is Beis Medrash Rabim, Medrash Shel Yochid Shekovea Bebeisoi, Ein Bo Kedusha Kol Kach. It's not as holy as a Beis Medrash Shel Rabim, but that is not clearly defined. How holy is it? So if a Beis Medrash has more Kedusha than a Beis Knesses, a Beis Medrash Shel Yochid that has less Kedusha than a Beis Medrash Shel Rabim, how does it compare to a Beis Knesses? That's a suffix of the Mogen Avraham, Kuf Nun Gimel Sif Kot Nalef, in a very brief comment. The Mogen Avraham has a suffix. Could we turn a Beis Knesses into a Beis Medrash Shel Yochid? Which means Beis Medrash Shel Yochid has less Kedusha than a Beis Medrash Shel Rabim, but it still might have more Kedusha than a Beis Knesses. It might have the same level as a Beis Knesses. It might have less than a Beis Knesses. And that's the suffix of the Mogen Avraham. Could you turn a Beis Knesses into a Beis Medrash Shel Yochid? And now this suffix could be explained, Kuf, Nun, Gimel, Siv, Daled. The Mechaber brings two different opinions. Malam b'kodesh velo moridim, kasha reisha l'seifa. And that's a lesson we find many times in the Gemara. When we say Malam b'kodesh, could we transfer one Kedusha to another when they're exactly the same level? It's neither Malam b'kodesh nor is it Moridim b'kodesh. Is that permissible? Shulchan Aruch brings two opinions. Yesh Ramim Shemuta, Yesh Ramim She'asur. And I think the suffix of the Mogen Avraham would be defined in according to these two opinions. If we say two Kedushas that are the same level as Asur, then the suffix of the Mogen Avraham must be maybe Beis Medrash Shel Yochid, even though it has less Kedusha than a Beis Medrash Shel Rabim, still has more Kedusha than a Beis Knesses. And that's why it would be Mutar, same level as Asur. According to the other opinion, in Siv Daled, the suffix of the Mogen Avraham must be, does it still have the same level of Kedusha as a Beis Knesses, and therefore it would be Mutar? But the Chiddush would be, you could turn a Beis Medrash into a Medrash Shel Yochid, you could turn a Beis Medrash Shel Yochid into a Beis Knesses. Goes both ways. But if you say Beis Medrash Shel Yochid has a lesser level of Kedusha than a Beis Knesses, then you could take a Beis Medrash Shel Yochid and turn it into a Beis Knesses, but not the other way around. So the Mogen Avraham doesn't really explain what his suffix is. How about a cheder, a Talmud Torah? What level of Kedushas does that have? Two of the later Achronim in pre-Holocaust Europe deal with this question. Shalosh Shtuvas Marash Engel, one of the greatest Gedolim in Galicia and in Poland, Chelek Zayin Siman Lamed Aleph, he sees it as a milta de pshita, that a Talmud Torah has the same Kedusha as any other Beis Medrash. After all, it's primarily learning Torah. It is said that the Chofetz Chaim was Mechabed his Melamed Rebbe that taught him Aleph, Beis, and Chumash more than any of the others. And the Chofetz Chaim said, when you go to Yeshiva Gdola, you cannot be totally confident that every svara you hear is Torah Emes. But what they taught you in Cheder, Aleph, Beis, Kometz Aleph, Kometz Beis, Chumash, Mishnah, that definitely is Torah Emes. So Torah is Torah. Even more than that, Shabbos Kuf Yutes, the Gemara says, Einu olam eskayim ela b'shvel hevel piem shel tanoike shel Beis Rabim. And when Abaye made that statement, that Rav Papa asks Abaye, shel chir, sheli v'shel choma, how about our Torah? We're the greatest sages, we're the greatest gedolim of this generation. And Abaye says, Einoi doima, hevel peshe yesh bo ta'am chet, lehevel peshe em bo ta'am chet. Our Torah is precious to the heavens, but the Torah of the children is even more precious. Loi ta'amu ta'am chet. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Zonefeld used to say, how far are we from the Torah of Rav Papa and Abaye? 1,000,000 light years. but the kinderlach are the same kinderlach. The children are the same. There's no real difference between the children 2,000 years ago and the kids today. Children are children. And this comes to show us, just to develop the feeling, how awesome and how important is Tenoike Shel Beis Rabbim. So Reb Shmuel Engel, I think he's right. He says, Cheder has Kedushas Beis Medrash. Interesting enough. Shalas Etshuvas Levushe Mordechai. Reb Mordechai Leib Winkler was one of the greatest Gedolim in Hungary. He was the Rav of Madurat in Yonas MMM. He says no. A Talmud Torah where little kids learn Torah doesn't have Kedushas Beis Medrash. And he makes 2 points, which to me don't sound very reasonable. He says, a cheder by Chazal is defined as Beis HaSefer. Tinek HaBerech beBeit HaSefer, not as a Beit Midrash. And I don't know why this halacha would be dependent on words. It's a Beis HaSefer because that's why it's called, because kinderlach learn Dvorim Shebechsav, Shiyat Torah Shai Lo Imrem Bepeh. Both the Medrash in the days of Chazal, we only learn Torah Shebepeh, so it's called a Beis Medrash. But why is that the defining factor? And the Levush Mordechai also says, Yehesh me Rabo Da'agadata. The Gemara at the end of Soita, the Gemara says, Ein lecha yoim she'en kalalos amaruvim shlachaveta. And then Chazal asks, how come we still exist? If we are deteriorating at such a fast pace, Ein lecha yoim she'en kalalos amaruvim shlachaveta. So what keeps us going? Kedusha the Sidra, V'yehesh me Rabo Da'agadata. And that is the Kaddish you say when you finish a Shiur. So Reb Mordechai Winkler says, in Cheder, they don't say Kaddish. And once again I say, the Kedusha of the Beis Medrash doesn't depend on Kaddish. Kaddish has more to do dafka with the Beis Hakeneses. Kaddish is avoida, not Torah. The Kedusha of the Beis Medrash is Kedushas Torah because you learn Torah. So I don't think it has anything to do with that Kaddish. I'm very makbid on the Kaddish when I finish giving a Shiur. Because if Chazal say that's Kiyam Oilam, but that is not fundamentally what Kedushas Beis Medrash is about, and therefore I think Reb Shmuel Engel is right. Roches Chesed Med Aleph. Oyev Hashem Sharatzion Mekol Mishken Ois Yankov. And Chazal say Pshat in this posuk. Oyev Hashem Sharatzion Shorim HaMisyonim Bahalocha Mekol Botamedroshes and Botaknesias combined. So obviously this Gemara teaches us there is something and some place which has more Kedusha not only than a Beis Hakeneses, even than a Beis Medrash. Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha. What are these Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha? The Marsha on the spot says, those are Bot HaMedrash in which we learn Lasuk Shmaitza Alibe de Hilchasa. Bot HaMedrash Alibe de Hilchasa. That is Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha. So there are many different Bot HaMedrash. And I made it clear many times, Ikar mitzvahs Talmud Torah is aderech melech bo v'hamasa asher yasun. To know halacha, to know how to be a good Jew, to know the details of the mitzvahs that we are to perform. And those are Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha. The Ksaf Sofer Chaim Siman Yud Ches has an amazing tshuva. And Bein Hashar, he writes, Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha, we will learn B'Kvius, not only random, not only coincidentally, not only a few minutes every day. That is what is unique and important about Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha. I b'didi Talia. My feeling would be regarding Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha. If that is really a higher level of Kedusha than both a Beis Medrash and a Beis Hakeneses, so why isn't it brought in Siman Kuf Nun Gimel Chaim Reish Nun Tes Yerodea in the context of Malam B'Kodesh V'Lo Moridin? Why doesn't the Beis Yosef and all the other poskim say you could transform Beis Hakeneses into a Beis Medrash? You could transform a Beis Medrash into a Beis Medrash which is in Halacha, but you cannot transform Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha into a Beis Medrash. Nobody deals with category number 3 or category number 4. Beis Medrash Derab, Beis Medrash Diyochid, Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha, and therefore my feeling would be a Beis Medrash is a Beis Medrash regardless of what they learn and how they learn. A Cheder, Tashbar, a yeshiva where they learn Lamdis, a kollel where they learn Halacha, it's all the same. They all have Kedushas Beis Medrash. Even though Oyev Hashem Shorim HaMitziyonim B'Halacha, that's more about the Gavra, not about the Kedushas HaCheftzeh. Beis Medrash is a Beis Medrash, and all Botei Medrash have the same level of Kedusha. Shiur HaMetzion HaMelacha have Chibu Yisera, because Limud Halacha is so important. But it doesn't affect the Kedushas HaChefza, and it doesn't have more Kedusha than an other Shur, and therefore, in the context of the Biur Halacha of Malam B'Kodesh V'Lo Moridin, there is no difference between Shiur HaMetzion HaMelacha and any other Beis Medrash. And this brings us to a very interesting comment. So I'm reading the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tzaddik Sif Yud Ches. Kuf Nun Aleph, Kuf Nun Gimel that we quoted before. Those are Hilchas Beis HaKnesses. Siman Tzaddik is Hilchas Tefillah. So in Sif Yud Ches, Siman Tzaddik we learn Beis HaMedrash Kavua, Kodesh Yoisem HaBeis HaKnesses, HaMitzvah Nesparal Yoisem HaBeis HaKnesses, Ushi Yisparal Basora. The Mechaber says Beis HaMedrash Kavua has more Kedusha than a Beis Knesses, so Mitzvah Nesparal Yoisem HaBeis HaKnesses. But only if you have a minyan. The context of the Gemara in Brochas Daf Ches really deals, where is it fitting to daven? Where should one daven? In the Beis Knesses where others daven, or in the Beis Medrash where he learns? So this halacha is based on that Gemara. And let us note, Shulchan Aruch says Beis Medrash Kavua. I think that is the way Shulchan Aruch understood Shiur HaMetzion HaHalacha. Kvius. Rashi writes in Brochas Daf Ches, Mokom Asifas Harabim, where many people come together to learn Torah. That is Kvius. But the Shulchan Aruch writes, Beis Medrash has more Kedusha than a Beis Knesses, Beis Medrash Kavua. So I think, according to the Beis Yosef, Shiurim HaMetzion HaHalacha is the real Kedushas Beis Medrash. And he comes la'afuki, lo hitzim anakal Beis Medrash shel Yochid, in which they don't learn B'Kvius. The Ramah has a different opinion. V'yesh shoimrim dafila b'lo yasora, or different spana b'Beis Medrash HaKavua lo. The Ramah adds on a word, HaKavua lo. And I'll explain. V'davka mi she'toros yamenosa ve'eno mizbatel b'lav hachi. The source of the Ramah is Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah's approach, and that is the Ramah's understanding. The reason it is preferable to daven on Beis Medrash and not on Beis Knesses is not because Beis Medrash is more Kedush than on Beis Knesses. It is because of Bittul Torah. And that is why Beis Medrash HaKavua lo. It's the kollel you're learning in. It's the yeshiva you're learning in. If you're learning there, daven there. Because if you're going to need to leave the yeshiva and go to another place to daven, way there, way back, that is Bittul Torah. And that is why the Ramah says Beis Medrash HaKavua lo. And I think the Mechaber and the Ramah L'shitosam. And let me make an interesting comment. According to the Beis Yosef, the reason to daven in a Beis Medrash, and it's preferable to a Beis Knesses, is because it has more Kedusha. And therefore, there is more Zgula l'Kabbalas HaTfilah. But that doesn't compare and it doesn't override a minyan. Because regarding a Tfilas Rabim, the Rambam says, Einoi choy zareikim, chazoka shittes kabel, la'oila miskabeles. So that's a bad trade-off. Better daven with a minyan and Beis Knesses than without a minyan and Beis Medrash, even though Beis Medrash has more Kedusha. But according to the Ramah, it's about Bittul Torah. And Bittul Torah overrides a minyan. And that is why the Ramah says, better stay in the shul you're learning in, stay in the Beis Medrash you're learning in, don't go to the Beis Knesses, even if you don't have a minyan. Because according to the Ramah, it's about Bittul Torah. And Bittul Torah would override Tefillah with a minyan. So my opinion is, Shiur HaMetzion HaHalacha doesn't have a different level of Kedusha. It is Kedushas Beis HaMedrash. How about Ezras Noshim? Different opinions in Achronim, mina kotze la kotze, to the extreme. So in Mincha Sosha, Shalas Tshuvas, I think it's Chelek Aleph, there's a tshuva. And I humbly remember, with great fondness, this shaila was sent to me by Moron Rabbeinu Rav Elyashiv. And Rav Elyashiv used to send to me questions that dealt with the Koisel Ma'aravi. I'm even embarrassed to say this, but Rav Elyashiv said, because the Koisel belongs to everyone, to Gans Klal Yisrael, it is the Nachla of Klal Yisrael, all different camps, all different chugim, all different tziburs, So to paskin on the Kaisel, we need a Rav that is accepted by all. And Rabbi Yosef thought that I fit that category. So he asked me to write this tshuva, and he signed off on it. So when they expanded the Ezras Noshim in the part of the Kaisel that is dug in, into the mountain, and it has a roof. It's a huge section of the Kaisel, which you all are familiar with. And on a rainy day, and a cold day, and a very hot day, people prefer davening in there because it's the Kaisel Amaravi. And there's an Ezras Noshim, and they wanted to expand the Ezras Noshim. The question was, could we expand the Ezras Noshim and take off from the shul where the men daven? And that depends what Kedushas is the Ezras Noshim. Now, I want to explain. The Ezras Noshim did not diminish the space where people stand. It just took off from Avir Beis Hakeneses because it was on pillars, and it didn't really take away from the space where men stand and daven. It just took away from the Avir. But there is Kedusha and Avir Beis Hakeneses. So I wrote a tshuva, an interesting tshuva, and you could look it up, and Rabbi Yosef agreed to that tshuva. So the Chachmas Adam, Yoredeya, Avodas Kechovim, Perek Vav, Sif Tes Vav says there is no Kedusha at all in Ezras Noshim because the Kedusha V'Shul, Kedusha Beis Hakeneses, is based on the concept of Tefillah B'Tzibah, and Noshim don't have a mitzvah of Tefillah B'Tzibah. Rosh Yosef, the Pri Megadim, and Megillah Chav Chesed and Beis, his opinion is Ezras Noshim is the same Kedusha as any other shul because Noshim Chayavo is B'Tefillah. So I think the two different approaches are, according to the Pri Megadim, Kedushas Beis Hakeneses is mitzvah tefillah. Noshim Chayavo is B'Tefillah. According to Chachmas Adam, Tefillah B'Tzibur. And Noshim don't have a chiyuv Tefillah B'Tzibur. So to them, they don't need a Beis Hakeneses. They can daven wherever they are. There's a compromise opinion. Both the Divrei Chaim and the Tzemach Tzedek and the Tzadeh Shava, these two giants were Rabbeim. They were leaders of Hasidic communities, and they were Gedolei Ador. Tshuvas Divrei Chaim, Chelik Beis, Or Chaim Siman Yudalet, Tshuvas Tzemach Tzedek, Or Chaim Simachov. They both say the men's shul has more Kedusha than the Ezras Noshim, but still the Ezras Noshim has Kedusha as well, because after all, Noshim Chayavo is B'Tefillah. So the Divrei Chaim says, there are so many parts of Avodah that are not relevant to Noshim, like Kaddish and Kedusha, like Kriyas HaTorah, like Kiyas Shofar, and therefore, where the men daven has more Kedusha than the Ezras Noshim, but Ezras Noshim still has a high level of Kedusha. One last comment to this section of the Shiur. If a Beis Medrash is more Kedusha than a Beis Hakeneses, how come you're allowed to eat and drink and sleep in a Beis Medrash and you cannot do so in Beis Hakeneses? The answer to this question is in a Megillah Chav Chesed and Beis. A Beis Hakeneses is defined as Beis Hashem. It is the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The definition of a Beis Medrash is Beirabonon. And the Gemara Megillah Chav Chesed says Beirabonon means Beis Rabbanon. The Beis Medrash is the home of Chachamim, of Talmidei Chachamim. And at home, a person needs to feel comfortable. At home you eat, at home you drink, at home you sleep. So you can do so in the Beis Medrash. Chazal expect the Beis Medrash to be the second home of every Yid, of every Talmid Chacham. So I once heard a story. I actually heard it from the Baldova. It's a bit amusing. So there's a Shiva that used to come home in the afternoon and take a nap, and it's totally legitimate. I also need, most of the days, a midday nap. Otherwise, it's hard for me to function by night because I usually go to sleep very late and I don't sleep much. So this Rosh Yeshiva took a nap, and he hears his wife responding to a phone call, and she says the Rosh Yeshiva can't come to the phone because he's resting. And he comes out of the bedroom and he tells his wife, never say that again. Don't say I'm sleeping or I'm resting. So what should I say? His wife asked. And he said, say that I'm preparing a Shiur. And his wife asked, but you weren't preparing a Shiur. You took a nap. And the Shiva responded, why do you think I take a nap? Because I need to say a Shiur. So that is as if I'm preparing the Shiur. So I don't know, next time a person called and the Shiva took a nap, how his wife responded. I assume she responded in the way he expected her to respond. But nevertheless, I think that is the idea of eating and drinking and sleeping in a Beis Medrash. Beirabonon. It's the home of the Chachamim. And the Rishonim explain if they would need to leave the Beis Medrash every time they want to eat or drink or take a nap, that would be Bittul Torah. So a Talmud Chacham, when he eats, it's Torah. When he sleeps, it's Torah. He wants to take a nap, it's Torah. And because this is Beirabonon, you're entitled to do so in a Beis Medrash, but not a Beis Knesses. Beis Knesses is a Kodesh Baruch Hu's home, not your home. It's a Beis Elohim. And that is why you cannot do those things in Beis Knesses. However, Rambam Shulchan Aruch, you could eat in a Beis Medrash, you could sleep, you could drink, but you can't talk a Sicha B'Teila, only Divrei Torah. And the Rambam writes, Perik Dalet Hilchas Talmud Torah Halacha Tes, and we find the same, Reish Mem Vov Yoredei Sif Yud Zayin. You can't even say Refuah. What does saying Refuah mean? In the days of Chazal, when a person sneezed, we said Asuta, which in Aramaic means Refuah. The Rambam writes Refuah. So if we spoke Lashon Kodesh, we said Refuah. In Yiddish, we say Tzigezent. You cannot even say that, even though it's based on Chazal. It's a bracha, but it's not Divrei Torah. The Prisha, Reish Mem Vov Yeredeya, says, we are noyeg l'hokel because we don't learn that much Basmoda. The Shach quotes the Prisha, and the Taz goes angrily against the Prisha. He says, who gave you permission to be Mekel? When the Rambam says it's also, Shulchan Aruch says it's also. And that is about one word, Asisa. Ma noimar v'ma nedaber, ana, anu, bo'im. Everybody talks in Beis Medrash. I don't recall when I saw anyone that's machman never to say hello, or how do you do, or something. You can't even say one word refuah, even though it's a bracha. It's not leitzonis. So this halacha that's very difficult to observe. Two of the Gedolim more than 100 years ago dealt with this question. Aruch HaShulchan Kufnun Aleph Sifei and Shulchan Aruch Yud Gimel Mizgas HaShulchan. And both say, it is as if we made it tonight, because everybody does it. And it's impossible not to talk. Ke'ilu Hisnu. I just want to point out that we find Ke'ilu Hisnu in the Ramah Kufnun Aleph Sif Yudalet, quoting the Trumas Edeshan. Leiv Beis Den Masna. Leiv Beis Den Masna is a concept we find a few times in Shas. If it is fitting people should make it tonight, which they don't, then Beis Din steps in and Leiv Beis Den Masna. So the Trumas Edeshan, quoted by the Ramah, says, you cannot take any personal use or benefit from Chefze de Kedusha, from Chefze de Mitzvah, but sometimes it's virtually impossible to be Nizar. Leiv Beis Den Masna, v'yavar b'shelo hisnu, ke'ilu hisnu. Kedushas writes another argument as well, and he writes that just like Chazal were mata achila v'shtiya because of Bittul Torah, maybe the same would apply to Sicha B'Teila. If people will leave the Beis Medrash, if they just want to talk to each other, that too will cause Bittul Torah. So at least we have two Gedolim that dealt with this question, and both Mar'im Ponem Lahakel. Asher Mishi Yochal Amoid Bekach. But based on the Shulchan Aruch and the Aruch HaShulchan, Minhag Olam is Lahakel. So we started the Shiur with the pasuk Matoivu Oyolecho Yankov Mishkan Noisecho Yisrael, and those are both the Hakeneses and both the Midrashos. So I wonder, why did Bilam want to curse the Jews? They should have no shuls. I don't think Balak has a problem with koilenim or yeshivas. I don't think Balak hates B'nai Torah. He is afraid of demographics. Pen Yirbe. Jews multiply too fast. And many other Sunni Yisrael and anti-Semites are afraid from demographics. So he's afraid the Jews will be a fifth column, and in times of war they might take the other side. So I think Balak is the least concerned about yeshivas and koilenim. He should be more concerned about Jewish warriors and Jewish fighters and the martial art experts and the bodybuilders, Veisvos, all these havolim. He should be afraid of them. So why is Bilam coming to curse they should have no shuls? And the answer is very simple. Bilam was a Navi. He knows the secret. He knows the secret of Jewish eternity. He knows what keeps us going. It is only Torah. Yesterday was the yahrzeit of my great Rabbi, the Kloiser Rebbe Zechet Tzaddik Levracha. And there's a story I tell many times. My father, my late father, Zechet Tzaddik Levracha, first time he met my great Rebbe and his great Rebbe, Hagon HaKodesh, the Tzanzer, the Kloiser Rebbe, the Divrei Yatzer. My father arrived in Auschwitz first day Shavuos 1944, Tovshin Dalet. That very same day he lost grandfather, grandmother, father, mother, and five out of 8 siblings. The Tzaddik, the Kloiser Rebbe, arrived one day later, second day Shavuos 1944, and he lost his wife and 11 children in Auschwitz. He was left all alone. And my father heard that Rebbe is in the next barracks next to where he was staying. He sneaked out in the middle of the night and approached the Rebbe and said, "My name is Moshe Weiss, and I would be so honored and overwhelmed by getting to know the Rebbe, to be mishamishim." And the Rebbe was taken aback and he said, "Bocha, the mindset Rebbe Selfen said, the Gurnish Alfen. Young boy, if you think it's going to do you any good to become close to me, I don't think it's going to do you any good." And my father responded, "Avada vetes mehelfen, it'll do me good because we could talk and learning." And the Rebbe was surprised and he said, "Bocha, you're in Auschwitz and you want to talk and learning." And my father said intuitively, "Of course I do, because if we don't talk and learning, how will we make it? How will we prevail? How will we survive?" And the Rebbe gave him a big hug. And they talked and learning for the next 12 months. And they talked and learning for the next 45 years. And my father became one of the closest confidants and mishamshim of the Rebbe. And all my 6 other brothers had the schus to be mishamish and be talmidim of this great gadol and this great tzaddik. Schusay togen oleinu. What my father intuitively felt in his heart as an 18-year-old boy, if we don't talk and learning, how will we survive? That is the side, the secret of Jewish eternity. That is how we made through this torturous gonus. That is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understood 2,000 years ago when he pleads with Aspasianus, "Ten li yavna v'chachomeha." He knows Beruach Kodshoy that the Beis Mikdash is doomed, and that's a Gemara Masechet Yoma. Ruach HaKodesh tells the Bechel Zakkai, "Habayis osed lechorev," and he also knows that the only guarantee for our eternity as a people is Yavne v'chachameo. As long as we have yeshivas, as long as we talk and learning, we survive. When we cease to talk and learning, we perish. And that's the other story of Chorban Abayis, Rebbe Kiva and Papos. Rebbe Kiva makal kilis barabim, and Papos asked them, "Don't you know the Romans gave out a decree, you can't learn Torah?" And Rebbe Kiva says, "Of course I'm afraid. But I want to share with you a mashal. The fox and the fish. And the fox turns to the fish, "Why are you afraid?" And they say, "Don't you see there are fishermen out there? On the bank there are fishermen. They put nets into the water. They want to fish us and catch us and eat us." And the fox turns to the fish and he says, "So why don't you come up here? There are no nets up here on the riverbank." And the fish say, "Are you the fox? People say you're so clever. You're a fool. And you're not very wise. We are water animals. This is where we have life, and we're still afraid. If we go up on land, we die. We can't live up there." And whenever I recite this mashal, I ask a very fundamental question. The Gemara says the fox turns to the fish and he says, when was that? Did the forefathers of the fox and the forefathers of the fish ever live together on land? Definitely not. Never. So what is he talking about? If I would be a fish in that river or in that pond, I would say, "Ato hu she'omrim olech upikech shebachayis ato lo pikech ato ele tipesh ata v'ata lo rak tipesh ata gam shakran." You're not only a fool, you're a liar as well, because our forefathers and your fathers never lived together. They can't live together. And I think that is an integral part of the moshel. In every generation, in every society, non-Jews and even some Jews, non-Jews and some Jews turn to B'nai Torah and they say, "Why are you different than anybody else? It doesn't make sense the way you live. You learn and learn and learn, and you never stop learning it. And much of the stuff you're learning is not very, very relevant." And I hear this many times from wonderful people, more modern Jewish people in America, wonderful people, but more modern outlook and hashkafa. And they want to know, my kids are learning in Korea Yerushalayim. When will he get his diploma? When will he end learning? And where is this going to take him? So what is he going to be? Will he have smicha? Will he become a rav? And when they ask me, when will he stop and end his studies? I say, he will end his studies when a Kodesh Baruch Hu decides to take his neshama up to the heavens. Up to that point, he will learn. So we are different, and nobody understands why we're different. So your boy in yeshiva is learning, what is the likelihood that he'll ever have an ox? 0. Well, what is the likelihood that his neighbor will have a cow? Twice 0. And how likely is it that your son's ox will kill your neighbor's cow? That is 3 below 0. So why are you learning something that is irrelevant? And we say we learn because we learn. Because this is Devar Hashem. We learn because Ki hi chayechem va'orech yomechem. We learn because Torah is mekadosh and Torah is metayar. We learn because whatever you learn gives you insight and understanding and wisdom and kedusha and tahara and holiness and brings you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Fox turns to fish and he say, "Come up here, let's live together." And we say, "We can't live together, we never did. You're land animals, we're water animals. We can't breathe up there, you can't breathe down here. So don't try to teach us how to live our lives. We know how to live our lives. We were born in the sea. This is where we were born and this is what we breathe. You can't breathe what we breathe, so you stay up there and please don't try to teach us how to live our lives. We're water animals." And the first time we opened our eyes, what we saw was Moshe Rabbeinu v'shnei luchos bis biyodei, and that was at Har Sinai thousands of years ago. It's part of the moshel, and it's part of what we need to understand. As long as we talk and learning, we survive. If we don't, we perish. And Bilam is a Navi. He's a prophet. He knows that secret. As long as they have Boteknosias and Botemedrashas, nobody could destroy them. And throughout history, this is fascinating. Whenever there was terrible decrees against Jews, and somebody thought he has the final solution, and we were persecuted and tortured and killed and murdered and robbed and mobbed, before Jews were killed, their books were burnt. I visited Berlin a few years ago, and they took me to a plaza, and there's a big plaque up there. This is where in 1936 Jewish books were burned. That was before the Germans murdered one Jew. Leil Abdolach Kristallnacht, before they even started building the gas chambers and the crematoria. Hundreds of shuls were torched and destroyed and put on fire. I don't know whether they understood this consciously, but mazle chose. Yes, you need to burn their shuls, you need to destroy their books. And that is why Bilam said, "Shelo yiyah b'hem," but the Hakeneses about the HaMedrash. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu hafach bracha laklala. Ma toivi oholecha Yaakov mishkanasech Yisrael. How glorious are your shuls, how magnificent are you yeshivas, the Botei Medrash. And that's what keeps us going. As my father, when he first met his great Rebbe, my great Rebbe, Zechet Tzadik v'Kodesh L'Vrocha Schusi Togan Aleinu, that is what he felt, and that is the sentiment he expressed and how touched and moved the great tzaddik was. If we don't talk and learning, how will we prevail? That's what we've been doing for the past 2,000 years, and that is what we plan to do for the remaining years till we will be zoicha b'kora b'yameinu to bias Moshiach tzedkenu b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.